Good morning. An update to bring you regarding the situation on the M6 toll motorway, which has been closed. Armed police in attendance. Staffordshire police have confirmed that the incident in Staffordshire is definitely not a chemical spillage. That's the latest line that we've got coming in. Just a few moments ago, a spokesperson for the company Megabus said that the coach involved had been travelling from Preston to London. There were 48 passengers on board. Megabus say that they're helping police with this incident.
We'd heard earlier that those passengers have been taken off the coach. Armed officers there, one source telling BBC West Midlands that someone was seen pouring a liquid into a box on the coach, and the liquid then started smoking, and then this operation then ensued. But that is the very latest line that's coming from the police, that this is not a chemical spillage. We'll obviously have more on that story in the coming minutes.
Significant reductions to the British Army will be outlined this lunchtime by the Defence Secretary Philip Hammond. It's the latest stage in the government's plans to cut 20,000 soldiers.
Well, ministers say the army will remain an effective, well-equipped force, but there are fears that some historic infantry battalions will be lost forever.
Over the past decade, the British Army's fought wars on two fronts, in Iraq and now Afghanistan. Both long conflicts committing large numbers of troops. It's something the army of the future will not be able to do again. The army's getting smaller. In 1978, in the Cold War, it had more than 160,000 soldiers. By 2010, it was down to 102,000. And by 2020, it'll be just 82,000 regular troops. Today, the Defence Secretary will explain where the cuts will be made, spelling out which regiments will survive and which units will be scrapped. General Sir Mike Jackson was the last head of the army to wield the axe, but he had to lose 2,000, not 20,000 troops. Today's decisions will not only end the historic ties for some proud regiments, but also raise questions about what the future army can do.
You get a sense of, is this army up to what an uncertain world may throw at it in the future? And I would say at 82,000, just.
Right! Just!
The army of 2020 will have to rely more on part-time soldiers like these. The territorials will double in strength and become an integral part of the army. This restructuring will be an enormous challenge, with the lingering question, does this make military sense, or is it all driven by politics and cuts? Jonathan Beale, BBC News.
Well, just a little earlier, the former head of the British Army, General Lord Dannatt, told Simon that the government's plans carry some risk.
Well, if we take at face value what the government's plans are, it's a regular army of 82,000 augmented by a reserve army of 30,000, so that grosses up to being somewhere over 110,000. The big question there is whether we will be able to recruit and train and motivate that reserve part to be an effective part of the overall army, to be an effective part of our overall land forces capability. We hope that works, that's the government's hope, but of course it carries quite a lot of risk, so we'll have to wait and see what the next few years bring.
What are the risks?
Well, the risks as far as the reserve army is concerned, that we won't be able to attract 30,000, we won't be able to train them to a sufficiently high level, and I think also there's a big issue for the country at large really, and that is whether employers will be prepared to allow their employees to take part in this reserve army, be prepared to let them mobilise for, it's not just a 6-month deployment. By the time they've done their pre-deployment training, it's about a year away. So there's a big question for civilian employers out there. So that is a big risk that the government is carrying. Of course, it's very hard to predict the future. Strategic shocks happen. Most of the major events that we've been involved in over the last 20, 30, 40 years, we didn't really predict. So the important thing is whether the government of the day in the future is going to be agile itself enough to say, well, actually, we probably need a rather larger army than we thought we did, so we'll have to do something about it. That's a question for the future.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you are an army man. There are those pointing out that the Navy seems to be coming out relatively unscathed because they are inherently more expensive and they can't face the cuts that the Army does.
Well, you're absolutely right, and I don't think this is an Army, Navy, Air Force issue. It's about the overall defence of our own realm and the safety of our citizens, and also, very importantly, the well-being of our service people as well. But inevitably, the Navy and the Air Force are expensive because their equipments are expensive. It's worth reflecting, a couple of months ago, the Defence Secretary, Philip Hammond, said with a degree of pride, and I understand that he had balanced the books in the Ministry of Defence, and there was a lot of balancing to be done, filling the black hole of 38 billion overdraft from the last government. He said he'd balanced the books, but what he's done is largely balance those books at the expense of the Army. The maritime equipment programmes, important programmes, the Type 45 air defence destroyers, the astute submarine programme, the aircraft carrier programme, and of course provision being made for the successor nuclear deterrent submarines. Money for that has been found largely at the expense of the Army. Because when the Strategic Defence and Security Review was announced 2010, the Army was going to go down to 95,000. But when the slide rules came out and the figure work was done, it was found that 95,000 was unaffordable, coming down therefore to 82,000 by 2020. It's a risk. Governments have to make their decisions, they've got to manage those risks, but we've got to be alert to what the future brings and be reactive to change circumstances if necessary.
Well, that was Lord Dannatt speaking just a little earlier. That's Philip Hammond. He will stand up in the Commons at 12:15 and give us the details of just where those cuts are going to be made, which regiments, which units. So we'll carry that live with, obviously, the opposition response, and it starts, we expect, at around 12:15.
The M6 toll motorway near Birmingham has been shut in both directions following a police-led incident. Staffordshire Police say that armed officers are dealing with this incident after a coach stopped of its own accord. Let's speak to our Home Affairs correspondent Tom Simons, who's been looking at this story for us, and it's to do with some kind of liquid being used on the coach, we think.
It's not clear. This is all happening at the Weeford bit of the M6 tolls, quite near Lichfield, on the slip road to a motorway service station there. And this coach, as we think, pulled over. Police have turned up to check what's going on, and we understand that somebody was seen pouring a liquid into a bag. May have been some smoke, and that, as you can understand, might have raised some concerns, and that might well be why the coach has pulled over. The police are not confirming many of the details of what's happening, but they do say that they are looking at the possibility of some kind of a terrorism-related incident. But of course, it could be misconstrued. It could be anything that looked like a terrorism-related incident as well. But what's happening is the police are taking people individually off the bus, which suggests they're checking who everybody is, making sure they haven't got anything on them that would be useful for inquiries, and then leading them up the slip road to the service station itself. We do have people on the way there, the helicopter's on the way there, so we hope to get some more idea of what's happening in due course. But I think it's worth pointing out that it's a sensitive morning. There have been some arrests in Newham, there have been some arrests in Ealing in relation to a separate terrorism-related investigation that the security services and the Met are carrying out. That is not linked to the M6 toll. We're
just hearing that these armed officers could be seen positioned next to a single-decker coach on the southbound carriageway. As you were saying, Tom, passengers being led off one by one, number of emergency service vehicles parked at the toll plaza, which is about 200 metres from the coach. What's, I suppose, significant is that the coach stopped of its own accord. It wasn't stopped by police,
Yes,
was it?
This was not a planned counter-terrorism operation by, say, West Midlands Police. They did not seek to be, they were not following this coach, which is, we understand, a megabus coach travelling from Preston to London, so southbound, using the M6 toll to avoid the congested M6 motorway, as is pretty normal. And but they weren't following this coach, they weren't trying to stop it, they've simply been called in once it has stopped. So that's as we understand it.
Tom, for the moment, thank you.
Well, let's stay with this story. Let's speak to Barry Jarvis now, who joins us on the phone. He was waiting at the toll this morning. It was shut down by police. Barry, thank you for your time. What did you see?
Well, as I pulled up to the booths, there was most of them were actually closed. I think the three that were left open were obviously quite heavily trafficked, quite a big queue. And then gradually it all filled up with traffic. And we were waiting there for about half an hour until which point I'd say 7 or 8 or so unmarked police cars came through the booths, and some of them stayed at the booths, but some of them went on. And then shortly after that, a couple of fire engines also came through. Eventually, about 20 minutes later, the police then started reversing all the cars from the toll booths and diverting them off the road via the lane for the wide loads.
And we were reporting there about how passengers were taken off the single-decker coach one by one, but we were also told about the number of armed police that were present. Did you see those armed police? How unsettling was this to see this rather large operation going on?
Well, it was a bit puzzling at first what was actually going on, because when I first arrived there wasn't actually many police there. It was only after, say, 20 or so minutes when all these unmarked cars started coming through, and you could see that they weren't your average police officer, that there was something major happening.
But when you say they weren't your average police officer, what do you mean?
Well, they weren't dressed, they weren't in the high-vis typical police uniform that you would see on the street. They were more the plain black, almost tactical-looking kind of uniforms, if you like. And then as we were diverted off down the wide load lane, you could see what looked to be armed police, maybe 2-3, stood at the toll booth with the rest of the police and one of the fire brigades.
Did you actually witness those bus passengers being actually taken off, or was that going on too far away from where you were? And in terms of the overall disruption, give us a sense of what that is like.
Oh, well, unfortunately we weren't able to see anything, and the police obviously wouldn't actually tell us what was happening or tell anybody what was happening. The bus must have been just too far out of distance. But in terms of traffic, I mean, all 10 gates of the booth were closed, and from what I could see, the northbound side was also stopped. So yeah, it was very disruptive. I mean, I've been delayed for a meeting by about an hour, and one of my colleagues has also tried coming onto the M6 a bit further north, and he's had to avoid it because it's some real big tailbacks from what I believe.
Barry, we're just on our screens as you talk to us at the moment. You sent us in a picture and we've put that up, just giving a sense of the sort of traffic build-up around this toll area where this incident is happening. Just in terms of that incident that is still going on, we're getting details all the time, but just finally, how worrying was it to be caught up in all of this?
Well, at first they didn't, like I said, there wasn't any worry really. It was just, I mean, I travel up and down the country quite a bit, and it was just another traffic jam kind of thing. But as I said, as you saw more and more going on, and more police going through, and the fire brigades coming through, it was quite unsettling, to be honest.
Okay, well, Barry, thanks for taking time to speak to us, and thank you also for sending us in that picture. Perhaps we'll speak again in the coming minutes. Thanks for your time.
More now on the announcement from the Metropolitan Police that 5 men and a woman who have been arrested under the Terrorism Act. They've been taken to a police station in South East London. Officers from a firearms unit were involved. Well, our Home Affairs correspondent June Kelly is at Scotland Yard. Let's speak to her now. June, tell us more about these arrests, of where and when they took place.
Well, we understand this is a possible plot involving suspected Islamist extremists with potential targets in the UK. These 6 people were arrested early this morning, 3 of them in Ealing in West London. That's 2 men and a woman. One man and a woman arrested at an address, a residential address, another man arrested in the street. Then 3 other men were arrested at an address in Newham in East London, and one of those men, a 24-year-old, was actually tasered. Police used an electronic stun gun on him, but we are told that he did not require hospital treatment. Now, of course, that East London address is interesting because we are now in the run-up to the Olympics, but Scotland Yard are saying that this is not linked to the Olympics, although searches are now going on of a number of residential addresses in East, West and North London, and also a business premises in East London as well is being searched.
But they are making it very clear that they don't believe that this was connected to the 2012 Games.
That's right, but of course the actual searches were only at the start of. So, I mean, they will never say unequivocally that there is no link, because who knows what the searchers could find, but they're saying their intelligence tells them this is not linked to the Olympics. This had been a long planned operation, and obviously the challenge always for the counter-terrorism command here at Scotland Yard and the security service MI5 is when to actually move in, because they have to make a very finely balanced decision between gathering evidence on these potential suspects and actually considering public safety. And we're being told this morning that these arrests were made on the grounds of public safety. The police felt they had to go in. The police and MI5 felt they had to go in now because clearly they were concerned about public safety.
What are they telling us about the nature of this possible attack and when it might have been planned for?
No details on that. As I say, it's just we are being told that potentially there were targets in the UK. We have no information as to what those potential targets could be. We're just being told that it is a possible plot, and clearly these people, it would appear, were of extremist views. We understand the woman who's been arrested, she has the same surname as one of the men, so obviously is either married to him or is related to him in some way, it would appear. But at the moment, that is all we are being told. And these people are now being questioned at a South East London police station. Police, first of all, will carry out what they call safety interviews, and that's when they try to establish whether these people can give them any information in case there is any threat to the public, if they can get any information from these people in case they need to go anywhere and perhaps look at anything that could be a threat to the public. They will have safety interviews first. This is the norm in all these counter-terrorism investigations, and then they move on to being questioned about the substantial allegations that they are now facing.
June, for the moment, thank you.
Just gone 15:15, let's turn to our main headlines here.